Hey everybody, my name's Andy Rozak and we're here at Sesame Street and we're going to be talking hurricane preparedness today. So thank you for all who are joining us on the live stream. Very excited to be here and got my good friend Rosio here who's going to talk about hurricanes with us. So thank you for having us at Sesame Street today.
Thank you for coming.
We're surrounded by all of our friends.
Yes, many of our friends, Sesame friends, are right here with us.
So we're doing this because hurricane season began on Friday, June 1st, and we know that, gosh, last year was a heck of a hurricane season, and a lot of people suffered a lot of loss and a lot of casualties, and many of those communities are still trying to recover now.
And it hit a lot of us personally too. My parents live in Puerto Rico, and I remember Hurricane Maria came with such force, and there's still many of people in Puerto Rico are still coping with the effects.
Yeah, that's true, and it's a very sad story, and of course they're even more vulnerable now. You know, if this hurricane season goes the way they're projecting it to go, which is above average. So I guess we should start, and just kind of introduce ourselves, and we'll talk a little bit about the organizations that we're from. For those of you who are not familiar, my name's Andy Rozak. I'm the Senior Director of Emergency Preparedness, and I work at Child Care Aware of America. And everything we're going to be talking about today, you can find on our website, which is childcareprepare.org. So I'd encourage you to head on over there. There's a whole host of resources and tools and all sorts of fun stuff. We've got an upcoming webinar series, and we've got one coming up in just a couple short weeks on active shooter basics. And then in July, we're actually going to have Sesame Street come and talk about Sesame Street and communities and some of the great work that you're doing. And then in August, we're going to have one looking at how to prepare your emergency supply kit. So how to know what to pack and what to pack and where it's at is what we're going to call that one. So a lot of cool stuff over at childcareprepare.org, so I'd encourage you to check that out. Would you like to tell folks a little bit about the great work you're doing here at Sesame Street?
Yes. So my name is Rocio Galarza, and I work in the U.S. Social Impact Department, and we do special initiatives that target very specific topics and also help produce materials for providers like yourself and families that are going through difficult situations, but also for the whole child. And so today we're going to be talking about our hurricane material, a little bit about our comfort material, and probably homework for your preparedness talk later on. We're going to show you where the emergency preparedness materials are. Again, that's homework for you to tackle later.
We like homework. It's all good stuff. So we want this to be interactive. We've got the chat feature open, so please, if there's questions or comments or things that you're interested in learning more about, engage with us. We'll be here until 9 o'clock. We've got some prepared remarks and some stuff we're going to talk about, but certainly this is a time to ask any questions you may have, or we can point you to some of the resources that both of our organizations have. So I guess we'll start off and we'll just talk about the forecast season ahead, and looking at the outlook, which they do every year. The forecasters are really predicting an above average season this year, which is probably not the best of news, but that's what they're predicting. So when we look at the NOAA forecast, the likelihood of 10 to 16 named storms, so that's winds of 39 miles per hour or higher, of which 5 to 9 could become hurricanes. And to become a hurricane, you have to get a wind speed of 74 miles per hour or higher. And then they're also predicting 1 to 4 major hurricanes, which would be category 3, 4, or 5, and those are winds of 111 miles per hour. So an average hurricane season usually get about 12 named storms. So you can see here, when we're talking the potential of maybe 16, that is a little bit, above average. So, just something to think about. We certainly hope the forecast is wrong. A lot of times they don't get it right. We hope this is one of those times.
But
right?
we can't prepare. We have to prepare for the forecast. Right?
We have to prepare, and I think it's caused by a lot of different things. Of course, weather patterns change and shift, and especially last year, the temperatures in the water were higher than they normally are, which made more severe storms. They were able to gather and stay gathered for a longer period of time.
A lot more rain in Houston. We saw some of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we've already seen Alberto that came, was that last week, I guess. So it's a very important reminder, and Alberto came before the hurricane season started. So, while we think June 1st to the end of November is typically a hurricane season, they certainly can occur before and after the fact. So never let your guard down. So let's talk a little bit about how hurricanes are different than kind of your traditional, emergencies. You think about floods, you think about rainstorms, you think about some of these things. But hurricanes are really dynamic, and they really have a lot of unique characteristics. And there's also a big potential with hurricanes to cause a lot of damage. So, we think about not only the rains obviously associated with hurricanes, but also the flooding that comes with that and the high winds that comes with that. And then, of course, the thing that a lot of people don't think about until it's too late is that storm surge, where essentially the winds and the gathering is pushing all that seawater into land. And that really caused a lot of difficulties, especially when we think about the Florida Keys and down in Texas. That storm surge can be very, very damaging. And if you think about it, not only is it bad to get a bunch of water dumped on you, but it's salt water. So, remember in Hurricane or Superstorm Sandy, when that hit New York and New Jersey, and we're here in New York right now, I mean, some of that water went down into the subway system.
Yes, and they had to close several lines. And it took a while for the city to be able to come back.
Well, and salt water, of course, doesn't play well with electronics.
Yeah.
So to get a bunch of salt water, to get a bunch of water is a bad thing, but even more so.
And you don't have to be in New York for that to happen. I mean, I think that that's also important to notice that this can happen in remote areas where many electrical wire can fall, and then it becomes a big problem.
Yeah, 100%. So I guess that's a good tip that we should remind everybody. If you do come across any down power lines, you should always treat those as if they're live. Never gamble that they might be dead. So always, stay away, use caution, make sure you call the power company. But, sadly, people go out after, hurricanes or strong storms, and, they want to go sightseeing and check out and see how their neighborhood did. And we always hear those stories about the people who don't treat the lines as being alive, and they end up getting, hurt or in some cases even killed. So, so very bad.
And for a lot of the childcare aware teams, one thing to keep in mind is that you are in many cases you want to be first responders because you care so much about the kids and the families that you serve, and that could put you also at risk. So just be mindful that because you want to help others, you also have to be mindful of the situation on the ground.
Yeah, that's very true. And sometimes, depending on the situation, the safest thing you can do is just stay at home. And let the professionals come out and clean up your streets, get the down, power lines out of the way, get the trees out of the way, let the waters recede. And that's, sometimes the safest thing to do is to do nothing. And we just have to be okay with that. Especially it's hard if you lose power. Everybody goes, folks with kids especially, the kids start going stir crazy.
Yes.
And that's where we can hopefully pull out some Sesame Street materials, some coloring books, some activity books, and keep those kids entertained.
Yes, and we do have quite a bit of material, particularly when you look at some of the, after the emergency actually. If you go to handling emergencies, you will see both materials to prepare for emergencies, but also for comforting children and to explain what a hurricane is, to explain what happened. And so if you go to sesamestreetandcommunities.org, /emergencies, or the topic handling emergencies, you will find some of those materials. And simple handouts to keep children entertained, to start talking about some of the feelings are there for you. Another thing to keep in mind is that families need a lot of help understanding beforehand about what children's behavior might be telling them, and so we have some tips about that so that families can know how to respond depending on the stress level that children are displaying. If you go into our material in handling emergencies, actually the first thing that you'll find, that telemonster little thumbnail is the hurricane episode. Sesame Street some years ago developed an entire story around hurricane hitting Sesame Street. And in this story, Big Bird loses his nest, and we go from preparing to later on when Big Bird is rebuilding the nest with the community. And so it's an excellent resource to go through and to watch. Of course, this is not during the hurricane necessarily, but actually as to prepare children to know what to expect, and to know that even though they're going to be noticing that there's a lot of loss as part of the community, there's also a lot of hope.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, that one in particular really resonates well. So good job, Big Bird. We appreciate that. Another thing to really think about, as hurricanes are different, is that we do get advance notice. So a lot of times in preparedness, we think about events if they're, no notice events, like an earthquake, you wouldn't have any notice necessarily. But hurricanes, we get a lot of notice that they're coming. So when you look at their 4 or 5 days out and you start to see them forming and all of that, I think that really gets people a false sense of security. Because they say, oh, that's coming, but it's 5 days away or 6 days away. I got time to prepare for it. And really, that's simply not the case. Those forecasts are just forecasts. And we've seen some that are really wrong. I mean, I think we've got a photo that we'll show in a bit about some of the models that are out there and just how wrong the models can be. I mean, even if you think about last year, when we were tracking Maria, I guess it was. Gosh, there's so many Maria that hit Florida, right?
I know, it's hard to keep track of.
I mean, we thought it was going to go up the east side, and then it ended up coming up the west side at the last minute there. So,
I think actually with that one, the one before was supposed to hit the island and it didn't. And so that when you talk about false sense of security, that plays a lot into it. That the previous experience could actually make people believe that something might be different this time around. So it's extra important to actually highlight that being prepared is very important, no matter what.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the examples that we'll show here is just the different forecast models and how crazy that they are. I mean, this one here in particular, if you look at this model and you just pick one of the many lines on there, and these are all different forecasting models, you might think, oh gosh, this thing isn't going to hit me. But I mean, look at how wrong it can be. And then we think about, especially last year, we saw some really humongous hurricanes. I mean, stuff that hit all the way from the Florida Keys all the way up to Tallahassee. I mean, that's almost 600 miles. So truly, nowhere was safe, and you can't let these models lull you into a false sense of security. So, when we think about hurricanes, we probably should think about things that we can do now, ahead of time, things that we need to be doing as the hurricane is approaching, and then things that we need to do after the hurricane. So when we think about things that we should be doing, now, before any hurricane is in the forecast or anything is formed out there, looking at your insurance is really important. You got to make sure you have the right insurance coverage. And sadly, we saw a lot of folks get denied claims, and a lot of folks simply didn't have the right type of coverage. So again, think about all the damage that can be caused by hurricane. Flood insurance is obviously important. But also making sure that your insurance covers things like, losses that you're going to take for prolonged power outages, wind damage, all that kind of stuff. You really need to sit down with an insurance professional ahead of time and understand your coverage. And for those child care providers out there, making sure that you have the adequate protection for your business is really important too. Because if kids can't come to your program, you're not going to get paid. And if you're not going to get paid, you're not going to have the money you need to start, meeting those insurance deductibles, paying your staff, and all of that. So, I'd really encourage everyone to sit down with their insurance professional and really have a hard look at the insurance levels that you carry and make sure you have the right insurance. Another thing that we should be doing in advance is really looking at your emergency kit. That's something that's fun. It's a great activity. It's great for kids. They can help out with that in a major way. And that's something that you could do as a really good family activity ahead of time. Even if it's just a rainy Sunday or a rainy Saturday or something, sit around the house and build up a emergency supply kit. And we've got a lot of resources, and it's particular infographics on our website over at childcareprepare.org. But this gives you a sense of what to pack. And a lot of this stuff, you don't have to spend a lot of money. In fact, if you go out to Walmart or one of the big stores like that, most of the items on this list, you can get this whole list for $30 or something like that.
Some of the tips that we've included in the website also, it said that including children in the preparation of these emergency kits is so important, because it presents the idea of preparedness for hurricanes or other emergencies as something that is just preparing for safety. It's something that we do as a family, and it's something that we can do and it's simple. And so emergencies do not have to be having these conversations. Yes, it's scary, but it is preparing for safety the same way that we put that seatbelt on, right? When we go in a car, it should be that natural for us to also prepare for emergencies. And it could be if we involve children in the age appropriate ways, like what you said. including them in creating this kit.
Well, and let's also think about some of the items that we'd want to put in that kit for kids.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the better and more familiar you can make an environment, the less scary it is, right? So if the child happens to have a favorite plush toy, and I'm sure it's probably one of our favorite characters here, think about it. Maybe you buy an extra one of those to keep in the kit with you. That way you've got one in there and it's ready to go. Or books that the child likes to read, or activities, Play-Doh, those kind of things.
Paper and some crayons could be very helpful. We
true.
recommend for the comfort item the second best, so that they know their comfort item is with them, but there's a second best right there just in case. And that way, some of the discussions of what comfort item can be quite complicated.
Well, and a lot of that stuff, and all that stuff, you don't need electricity for.
Yes, that's
so,
true.
I think about when we were kids, we didn't have all these fancy gizmos that needed charging and electricity and Wi-Fi and internet and all that. So we might have to go old school for a little bit after a disaster, and that's okay. But again, a Crayola and a piece of paper, that always starts and that always works, right?
So there you see in our website, there is, what you're seeing here is offering comfort, which are great materials to use afterwards, after a hurricane hits. But when you go into handling emergencies, there is some ideas for including in the kit that are child appropriate ideas as well. So just so that you know.
And another thing that we want to do in advance is make sure that we're signed up for any kind of emergency alerts. So a lot of the counties and cities now, have alerts that are out there. If you just Google emergency alerts and your city or county name, you'll be amazed how many folks have that. And that's a free service. You can usually get them via email or text message. So I would really encourage you to sign up for that and get those emergency alerts. That way, as information becomes available, they're going to push that out and get that to you. Another nice thing is most communities now have some kind of a social media presence. So obviously those of you watching us on Facebook have Facebook. So your city or county probably has a Facebook page and or a Twitter account. And more often than not, that's how they're going to communicate as well as the traditional ways during a disaster. So if you still have cell phone service and are able to get online, or even in advance of the storm, really thinking about where shelter locations are, what the evacuations are going to look like, all that. More often than not, you're going to start finding that information on social media. So that's a good idea to have that as well.
It's a great idea. And actually, I remember that some of the first communications that I had with my family, because I couldn't communicate with them directly, I would go to social media to see the groups that were forming on around my town, around the people that lived close to my town, to see what was going on, and those were the first images that I saw. So it's very important for us to keep connected and to go to social media and see what instructions are giving and information.
Well, and that really brings us up, to a point that we are so reliant on our cell phones as a main way of communication. So you should also think about how you're going to keep that cell phone, charged and up to speed if you lose power. And a real simple way to do that is to just go out and invest a few dollars in a car cell phone charger. A lot of the newer cars, of course, have the USB plugs built right into them, so you could just maybe take your existing cable and plug it in that way. But really nothing, for $5 or $10 to have a cell phone charger in your car that's always there and ready to go, because odds are your car's going to be able to start. That would be good. And most of the, I think all of the telecommunication, the towers, the cell phone towers and that, I think they're required to have some kind of backup power. Now, if it's a really bad storm, we're going to see, infrastructure failure, and some of those towers may get blown away or may simply not work. But, most of them do have some kind of backup generator capability, or even if the power goes out, they will stay on for a bit of time. And more often than not, if you can't get a cell phone call out or you can't get an email out, most of the time a text message will work. It doesn't use as much bandwidth, and you'll be able to get those out. So a couple of things to think about. We're also at Child Care Aware of America, we've partnered with Compliant Campaign, and we've got a brand new mobile texting service that we're piloting right now. And that's really looking at communication from a child care provider to the parents in the program. So, if you're looking for a quick, simple, fast way to get messages out, it's mobile texting. I mean, when you look at the open rates for email, only about 15% of email actually gets read. But, when you look at mobile texting, 99% of text messages get read, and about 90% of those get read within the first 3 minutes. So we know it's a very effective way to get the message out.
Well, if the message is from a child care provider, they're going to open it.
Well,
because
100%.
They're trusted, and of course your you're taking care of the children. So of course they're going to open your text.
So if you'd like more information or would like to enroll in our pilot and help us out to figure those issues out, go to our website, childcareprepare.org, and at the very top, just click on the mobile texting pilot link, and you'll just fill out your information, and we'll get in touch with you. But something we're really looking at. We've got to meet people where they are, and with today's environment, people are on text message, and that's how they want to be communicated with, and it's even more important in disasters. So we're really happy to be able to offer that, and I think it's going to be helpful for a lot of folks. Let's see, we're also going to talk about your evacuation plan. So if you are in a zone that is prone to hurricanes, there's a very good chance that you have evacuation plans in your county telling you how to get out of there if you have to. And again, this is something that you want to familiarize yourself with ahead of time so that if the evacuation is ordered, you're not scrambling, right? So take a look at that. Again, most of those are online. You can just Google evacuation routes and your city or county name, and all that information will come up. Every city and county has some kind of an office or some kind of an individual. Usually it's the emergency management agency that's designated to work at these issues. I think the fire department wants to be on the webcam. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but they're out the window there. But yeah, look at your emergency management agency at your county or city level, and they usually have a whole host of information on these topics as well.
Yes, and share it with the families also that you serve, because I'm sure that they're looking for similar information as they prepare.
And one last thing I just wanted to highlight, when you think about, especially if you're making an emergency supply kit for your child care program, if you're a child care provider, make sure you keep a copy of that parent contact information in that bag. Because that's really important, and we know how often contact numbers change or cell phone numbers change or whatever. So don't be afraid to harp on your parents that hey, they need to provide you with the latest cell phone number, and maybe even send them a reminder once a month or once a quarter just to make sure you have the latest information. Update that and then put it in your emergency kit. That way you've got a backup copy just in case something happens. But that would be helpful to have as well, and something you can do ahead of time. You should do that year-round anyway, right?
It's also a great reminder for families that they should be creating their own emergency kits, because when you ask the information, it really does trigger that must-do type of a reminder.
So let's talk a little bit about as the hurricane is approaching, and what are some things that you want to think about, what are some things that you want to take a look at. And I think we've got a slide here we're going to show about the different types of hurricane, the different categories that come up. So, there's different categories of hurricane. Obviously, you start with hurricane tropical storm or disturbance or whatever. These are not quite hurricanes yet, they haven't formed. But then when you actually start classifying hurricanes, you see the scale here on your screen now. So, category 1, people would say that's, the lowest category, all the way up to category 5. And you can see the difference in wind speed and storm surge of water that's going to potentially come onshore and all that. But this, again, is something that you shouldn't get in, really lulled into a sense of complacency. Because as we've seen, hurricanes can strengthen, they can weaken, they can shift course. And even a Category 1 hurricane, that's still 95-mile-an-hour winds. That's a very dangerous storm. So just because it's a Category 1 or a Category 2, we still have to take those things seriously, because they still can do a lot of destruction and damage, and can cause death, quite honestly.
And in terms of the preparation for each one of the categories, is it similar for all of them?
Well, I think the preparation should be somewhat similar. I think when we get above really Category 3, 4, and 5, I think you're going to see a lot more evacuations triggered, just because that storm is probably strong. Well, obviously it's stronger. It may even be bigger at that point. So I think you're going to generally see more evacuations ordered in those upper categories. Mm-hmm. We're also going to have to start thinking at that point about what buildings are actually going to survive. Mm-hmm. Some buildings may not be rated for 150-mile-an-hour winds, so that's going to force the emergency management officials and the local officials to really consider those evacuation orders. If they know there's areas that have construction that's not up to par like we have today, and concrete reinforced and all that, they very well may, ask certain areas of town to evacuate, simply because they are afraid the structure is not going to survive, that level of wind. And again, when you think about this wind, it's not just like a breath of air and then it's gone. We're talking about sustained wind. When you think about some of these, when they stall out and they just spin and dump rain and wind for hours, that can be 12, 24 hours of just getting hit with wind and rain and, just unrelenting, right? So those buildings that are older, that are not, up to certain standards, they can definitely, maybe they'll survive an hour or two, but they're not going to survive 10 hours of that punishment, right?
So evacuation routes are incredibly important, particularly as the categories go up, huh?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%.
To not follow those evacuation plans.
Right, absolutely. So, we're thinking about the hurricanes. Oh, that's a good question here. So where do you keep our emergency supplies? Great question. Depending on, if you're talking about a home supply kit or a child care program supply kit, I think you've got a couple different options. In the school setting or in a child care setting, we've seen a lot of teachers putting them on hooks by the door, so that if something bad happens and you have to evacuate or get out of there, you just grab that backpack or you grab that kit, you throw it on your back, and you're right out the door. For other types of kits, so if you're going to have a big kit, but it's going to be used because you have to shelter in place or you have to stay in, if there's a tornado or something that requires you to lock down or stay down, we've seen a lot of success in taking a big 55-gallon drum and putting some of those wheels on it. A lot of times the janitors will have those big 55-gallon garbage cans and they have wheels so they can push them around. Well, that's a perfect thing to use for your supply kit, because then you don't have to try to lift it. You can just push it around. So definitely take a look at doing some of that. For those of you who travel a lot for work or go back and forth, you should have a supply kit in your car.
I was going to say that actually has come up quite a bit in the focus groups, the car, as a really great place to store some of the kids' materials.
Yeah, because you don't want to be caught on the road in the middle of nowhere and you have your car stall out and then not have a blanket or something like that. So something simple: car charger, flashlight, blanket, maybe some Band-Aids. Certainly I always keep bottled water nearby. Those are all good things. So I think you have a lot of options. I think it's definitely knowing your program and how many folks you're trying to care for. And there's nothing saying you can't have a few different emergency supply kits, kind of scattered throughout. Like this is one for, 72 hours, and of course that's going to have a lot more stuff, whereas this is one for just, 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, kind of a smaller one just to kind of get us through the disaster.
One thing that has come up is that whether you have one or several, to put a reminder, perhaps even in the new year, January 1st, in your phone, to look through the kits, to make sure that if you need to change anything that is in them, everything is up to date. And if you put it as part of, the New Year resolution, you will probably do it January 1st.
Well, there you go. So if my wife is watching, you know what we're going to do on New Year's Eve when we count the balls down. Here's another note here. Colored pencils are better than crayons because crayons melt. Well, that's a good point.
Great point.
Another thing about crayons, if you want to go MacGyver, is you can actually use a crayon and you can light it and it becomes a candle.
Oh, I didn't know what that
yeah,
is.
in an emergency, you can light your Crayola candle or your Crayola and it'll turn into a little flame there for you, a little candle for you.
But you should pack flashlights and plenty of batteries in your emergency kit.
Well, one of the things that we've been doing for childcare programs, we've been putting in the crank radios, and it's a heck of a. First off, it doesn't need batteries, and it's as long as you crank it, it's going to generate electricity and work, so you can have a radio and a flashlight. And it's a great thing to keep kids occupied. They love cranking that little radio, right?
And he takes them also, yes.
You give it to Johnny, he cranks it for a while, he gets tired, you give it to Susie, she cranks it, and you kind of make a game out of it. So
that's a great point. I remember that the first time that I talked to my parents and the mail opened up, I asked them, what do you need? And it's like, batteries, size D. And it's like, oh my goodness, really? Yes, that's the only thing we need right now, please. And so, yes, if they had the crank, it would have been much easier.
Let's see. What do you think about light sticks? Well, I think light sticks are good if you want to get noticed. I mean, I don't think they're good as actually like illuminating anything, right? I mean, if it's very effective, obviously, if you're out on Halloween and you put a light stick on a kid or a pet or something like that. That way, you see them and it draws attention. But not quite as effective if you want to shine a light because you have to work on something or whatever. But I think light sticks, they have their place, they have their use. Certainly something fun for the kids to play with. Yeah. And you can get those pretty cheap, actually. I'm sure you can get a whole, stack of 100 of them for not that much.
Yeah, and the one thing to keep in mind is how much you're putting into the kit that is the most needed, and what are some of the things that could help you, right? So it's making one of the experiences that we had in creating the list for Sesame was that the list kept growing and growing with all the good ideas. And sometimes all of those things are important, but you have to really look at what is it that you are going to need right away, and what is that you're going to be needing later on.
So the hurricane's coming. We're getting prepared. We want to make sure our car is filled up with gas, of course. We've all seen those horrific images at the 11th hour as the hurricane's approaching and people are trying to evacuate and you can't get gas because the gas station's either out of power or out of gas or the line's 3 hours long. So, for those of you who live in a hurricane prone area, keep that car filled up with gas. It's just a good thing generally to do. I try not to let mine get below half a tank, especially if I know, there's a risk of some severe weather. But, stocking up early is always key because, again, not only gas stations, but we've seen these horrendous pictures of supermarkets where the whole shelves they're gone, right?
The water bottle's gone. So
everything's
it's
gone.
To stack little by little.
In D.C., everybody buys the bread and the milk.
Yeah.
I don't know. They're making French toast or something. I don't know what they do with all this bread and milk. You don't want milk because if the power goes out, what are you going to do with all this milk? I don't know. But the shelves are always cleared. So, again, knowing what to do ahead of time, thinking about that. Thinking about your non-perishables, I think, is another good point, too. What do you have that you can easily transport with you in a car? Or, if the power goes out, you don't necessarily need to keep it refrigerated. Some snacks would be, something to think about, too. We want to secure our home. So, if you do live in a hurricane-prone area, make sure you know what your plan is for, boarding up your house. Do you have pre-cut sheets of plywood or corrugated metal or whatever that you have? You probably do. Storm shelters and whatnot. Think about where you can move in your items. So if you have a child care program and you got a bunch of stuff laying around in the playground for kids, all that can take flight and cause damage in a hurricane. So you're going to want to bring that in, get that secured. You can clean and fill your bathtub with extra water in case you do suffer a power outage or you can't get water. Think about the places in your home that have water that you could use. One is a hot water heater. Now it may not be hot because you may be out of power, or it may be hot because you're on gas and usually the gas doesn't go away. But there's water in your hot water tank. There's water certainly in the back of your toilet if you come to a dire situation. For those of you who have ice makers in your refrigerators,
there's water there too.
Water there too, and if you know something's coming, fill up your bathtub or fill up your laundry.
I will always remember my mom did that. Yes, the bathtubs were filled with water, and now I understand why that is so important.
Let's see, what else do we have here? All right, so I think move all your papers and valuables to higher floors. So, you can't talk about that enough, especially when you think about the rain and then that storm surge. If you do have vital records and important documents, you want to find a spot to put those now. Figure out where you're going to put those ahead of time. It's a good idea also to take photos of that. So anything that's important, car titles and insurance policies and, passports, driver's license, marriage license, anything like that, just snap a photo on your phone and that way you've got a record of it in case, it gets lost or it gets damaged. I know that was a big problem we saw when folks were evacuating from places and they, in their hurry to leave, they ran out the door and they forgot all their, all their papers at home.
And there's secure places also to save them on a cloud. So that's another alternative, particularly if there's a lot of business paperwork that they have to keep.
Yeah, and honestly, that's just a good business practice you should be doing, anyway for your continuity of operations and thinking about, what if I came home and my house burned down? What would I lose and how would I prove that I had these documents and stuff? So. Very good place there. All right, I think we've touched on most of that stuff on what to do when the hurricane is coming. So let's talk a little bit about, okay, the hurricane has passed. And I know Sesame Street has a great resource on post-hurricanes. We'll put up an image of that that we can talk about. But this is a post-hurricane guide, and you just want to explain a little bit about what this is?
Yes. So we prepared for hurricanes. Like you were mentioning, we're talking about creating an emergency kit, creating an emergency plan together with the families that you serve, and looking at all of that information. After the hurricane, there's a lot of need to create spaces for comfort, to help parents explain to kids, because children do need repetition in order to understand what's going on. So what are some of the answers that parents can give to those children once they start asking questions about what happened? And what we've developed here is a guide that has tips for parents with those same questions and possible answers, as well as activities that, even though they're very lighthearted and they're very age appropriate, they do tackle some of the most important strategies that you will find that will help children feel comforted. Like, for example, that comfort item. That, like, looking at the helpers in your neighborhood, and understanding that there are people that are there to help. There are other, as you will see, there are many other strategies, but I think that one thing that is very important is that the way that we've designed it is so that you pick and choose actually from the pages of the guide what you think might be most important for the families that you're serving. So each page can be photocopied on its own, and it will make perfect sense for you to give it out on its own, or it can be copied as a guide. And please feel free to make copies, of course, and hand it out. Of course, if you want hard copies to then later on make more copies for the families, you should let us know. Email us, and we'll be very, very happy to share some of those hard copies with you.
So we've had a hurricane. It came through. The hurricane is now gone, and we're starting to pick up the pieces of the puzzle. Odds are the power is going to be out, and as we think about now, I mean, it's been 6, 7, 8 months in some cases, depending on if you're in Texas or Florida or Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Some places still don't have power. Mm-hmm. And, obviously our thoughts and our prayers go out to those communities, and I know folks are working around the clock to restore that power, but that is something that can happen. And you really need to think about how are you going to deal with a power loss of a prolonged nature like that. I remember, talking to the folks down in the Keys. One of the big issues they had is they let people back into the Keys, but there was no power. Mm-hmm. So every time they went to either the grocery store, the gas station, or anywhere, there's no power, there's no credit cards. Mm-hmm. So yes. Really, cash becomes king in these kind of disasters. When there's no power, you really need to have cash if you're going to try to purchase any kind of a product. So it's a good idea to keep a little bit of cash in your emergency supply kit as well, and have I'm guilty. I live on the credit card. I rarely have a lot of cash on me.
In the blackout here in New York City, it happened to me too. And thank goodness I was here at Sesame Street, and our friends, some of them had cash, like, take $20, take this, take that, but we were all in the same boat, so they were very giving.
Well, and you just don't think about it.
You never think about it. I was younger, right? And now I am more prepared than that.
So as part of our recent webinar series, we had a really good webinar last month on food safety and on mold issues. So a lot of the stuff that we saw after the hurricanes, prolonged power outages, we had a lot of questions about food safety and is it okay? Should I throw it out? How long is it good for? All that kind of stuff. And then we also had a lot of inquiries about the mold. And sadly, when the waters come, if you don't get that taken care of in a quick timeline, you're going to get mold in your business or your home or wherever. So we do have those webinars. They are free to watch on childcareprepare.org. So USDA was a really good partner, and they talked about food safety. And we also had the National Environmental Health Association have some experts and talk about mold and how to recognize mold and how to get rid of mold. So the issue is, after the lights and sirens go off and it's really the emergency, quote unquote, is done, it's really all the public health and environmental health issues that really come to bear. So when we think about food safety, when we think about water quality, a lot of people who have well water, think about all the chemicals and all the garbage and all the sewage and all the runoff that hurricanes and floods can bring. And if you have a private well and you're not on city water, you need to think about that, and you probably should get that well water tested to make sure that's still okay to drink. We also think a lot about just all the different vectors. So whether it's rodents and rats and mice or even mosquitoes, those things all have a place to go after hurricanes too. And what we saw particularly in Puerto Rico is a lot of the screens were damaged or destroyed. You didn't have power, so you had to open up your windows to get that breeze in there. But when you're opening up your windows and you don't have a screen, the mosquitoes are horrible, especially in the dawn and the dusk. So, and of course Puerto Rico has struggled with Zika and other issues before that. So, making sure that you have some, mosquito spray and, some of that stuff in your kit would be a good idea as well. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, we've got a picture, I think, from the Florida Keys when I was down there of all the debris that happened. So, here we go. So when you think about, getting a place safe for kids to go after a hurricane, it's really a daunting task. I mean, this is a picture I took on Route 1, which is the main route, in and out of the Keys. And look at that. I mean, that's 20, 30 feet high. And this was not unique to this one stretch of road. I mean, this is communities that were like this. So, really thinking about where you're going to be able to send kids that's safe. I mean, it's not like you can just open the door and say, okay, kids, go out and play. Look at that. And of course, mixed into all that is mold, and there's, spoiled food, and there's nails and construction materials, all that kind of stuff. So when the Keys reopened, we had about 500 kids that had been, evacuated from the Keys, and then they were waiting to come back to the Keys. And this is the kind of situation they found themselves in. And of course, the schools were shut down, and it was a real struggle for parents to try to figure out how to keep their kids safe. Luckily, a lot of the child care providers stepped up and helped out, and some even took kids into their own home. But that's a reality, and that's certainly a picture that you may see after a hurricane.
Well, and there also, those are images that do cause long-term traumatic effects that we should talk a little bit about that, particularly when it comes to the families, to the kids. So it's important and also for childcare providers, because you're part of their community. So it's very important for you to also assess how much of the children that are going to come into your care after a hurricane, how much have they seen, how much they have experienced, and how, as a community, you can start perhaps practicing some of these trauma-aware strategies and try to heal together, because those are hard to watch even now, and we haven't been part of those communities so directly.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to watch. We've just shown a couple of photos. We had Banana Cabana that was down there that was hit very hard, and you saw some of the debris in their front lawn. And then the one we just showed was Miss Deming. That's a family child care provider that's been in business for 30 years, and every piece of her worldly belongings was out on her front lawn. And I've been working with these communities and know these people firsthand. It's been 7 months. They haven't received a dime from insurance.
It takes a long, long time.
Not a dime.
Recovery
right?
can be very hard, and finding support within the community as well. And someone to talk to sometimes too can help deal with some of these effects of that undoubtedly are part of the trauma that come after the disaster. One thing also to keep in mind is that once the power does come back, and people start looking at the images on the TV, and they're able to perhaps charge their phone once again, be careful on how many of those images you are really exposed to, because that also can serve as triggers, and particularly for young kids, for the little ones, it can be re-traumatizing, because they don't necessarily know that they're not happening right now, and that it happened in the past. So just encourage families to turn off the TV sometimes, and make sure that the children are not watching as many of these images.
That's a really great point. Making sure that the screen time is limited, and certainly, there's some programs on the nightly news when they keep showing the horrific images over and over and over. Some children have a hard time understanding if that's live or if that's a replay. They don't. Sometimes they don't make that connection. So, especially for those families and communities that have been through these tragedies. Oh, that's a really important part to think about, limiting your exposure time to that. So excellent point on that as well. There was a question about a recommendation for a water filter or distilling system. And I got to say, when we're thinking about water and water quality issues after a hurricane, there's really nothing that you're going to be able to buy residentially or commercially that's going to really be of help in that. Like, it's not... You can't just go out and buy a Brita. Like, it's a different level of purity and micron level and stuff that we're talking about. So I don't know. I don't have a recommendation on that. I would say, getting your well water tested or getting your water tested is the first step. And then if those test results come back, to have a more in-depth conversation with somebody about, what impurities they found or what they found in your water. It's certainly going to be beyond, just going to the store and buying a $30 filter or a pitcher in that case. And that came up a lot in Texas. We think about, remember they had the chemical plant that caught fire and all that. And, so not only did you have the floods and the hurricanes and the high winds, and you had this chemical plant. It was,
the water and
oh my goodness, it was just, we were waiting for Godzilla to show up with all these disasters. Like what possibly could be next for these poor people? And I know a lot of that, the concern was the chemical was going to get in to either the water that was out there, the wastewater, or even the groundwater and start contaminating some of that. So I know the health department down there did a great job doing a lot of outreach and doing some testing for folks. But that's something you need to think about. So keep that on your list as well. And I'm sorry, there's not a solution you can just run out and buy it at the grocery store or at Walmart or Target or something.
But perhaps looking into phone numbers of people that can help afterwards, right?
Yeah, I think having that ahead of time is good. And then also the importance of bottled water.
Yeah.
Bottled water can't be understated. I mean, that's and they say it's a gallon of water per person per day, and of course that adds up pretty quick. But
stack it up little by little.
That's
so
right.
That you don't wait until the last minute and then becomes a bigger issue.
Yeah, because if you're going to wait till the last minute, the water's not going to be there for you to buy. So you can go out and buy cases of water, and a lot of times you can get those for under $5. But have a case that you keep nearby. All right, let's see. So I want to just talk a little bit about, I know we showed some of the examples of childcare, but I want to talk specifically about some of the impact that the recent hurricanes have had on the childcare programs themselves, and really think about childcare, not only all the important work it does on a day-to-day basis, but also think about an economic driver. So together with our partners down in the Texas area at Collaborative for Children, we were able to do a SNAP survey after the hurricanes to check on the status of the child care programs and the functioning. And this is some of the preliminary data that we got immediately after the storm. This is Hurricane, I guess that was Harvey back there in Texas. And there's a lot that were closed, quite honestly, and there's still a lot that are closed today. We've got almost 20,000 children are served by programs that are receiving financial support right now to support recovery, which equates to about 310 damaged child care programs. And so far, they've got over $2 million of financial support has been distributed to support response and recovery efforts for those child care providers. So this is really ongoing, guys. It's been a long time since the hurricanes hit, but thankfully through the partnership we had and through our mobile texting provider compliant campaign, we were able to quickly get a snapshot of what the status was, so we can immediately start figuring out what areas got hit hardest and start getting resources and help to those areas. So I know that was the one in Texas, and then certainly we have one for Hurricane Irma when that hit the Florida Keys as well. And these were ongoing. These were live polls that we would conduct basically every day. But it really helped to inform decision-making process about where the shelters need to be set up, where's there a lot of kids that are displaced, and in the case of Irma in Florida, we had 71 child care programs closed, and that was quite a few children that were displaced for that. I think at one point we were counted about 25,000 kids that were displaced because of Irma. So we want to thank our good friends down at the Early Learning Miami-Dade and Monroe County, another one of our great member organizations that we've worked on these issues with. And as we think about Puerto Rico, we've got almost 1,900 child care programs that have been impacted down there. So quickly these numbers add up, and when you think about a few programs and how many kids they have the potential to serve, it's really astronomical. We've had phone calls from hospitals and from insurance companies and from businesses saying, hey, we can't get our businesses back open because these children have nowhere to go and the parents can't come to work. And there's actually a statistic out there from FEMA that after a disaster, housing is the biggest barrier to people getting back to work and getting back to normal. But after housing, it's childcare. Where do the kids go? If the kids don't have a safe place to go, the parents can't go to work. And these numbers add up, very, very quickly. So if you look at the amount of money that U.S. businesses lose every year just because of employee absenteeism, because childcare breaks down, that's $4.4 billion. And I know our friends on the research team, and Dion, if she's watching, will be happy to see her data here. But this is just on a normal everyday basis, on a blue sky basis. So if we're losing $4.4 billion annually without disasters, you can only imagine how much we're losing, when these disasters happen and childcare has to close. So a very important part there to get childcare up and get it back up and running. We've been working very closely with our friends at FEMA. Childcare is designated as an essential service, so it is getting elevated to that level because people are beginning to understand how important it is to make sure kids have safe places to go. And for the childcare providers who are watching, 40% of businesses don't reopen after a disaster. We don't want you to be in that 40%. We want you to be in the 60% that reopens. So, please be thinking about these issues. Be thinking about alternate sites where you could go if you had to. Florida Keys had a really good, I see Dion is watching, very good. And shout out to her and her great work that her research team does, which you can find at our website as well. But, when we think about that 40% that never reopens, those are tragic stories. And think about where you would go for a prolonged period if your child care program, if the building or your family home got damaged. The Florida Keys, they worked with their licensing department, and they were able to give out provisional licenses that would allow child care to operate in alternate spaces to get child care providers back to work and get kids back into care. And we had a bunch of different venues that were used. One of the schools gave some space, a couple of community centers gave space, so a lot of different options. But again, these are conversations to really have ahead of time so that you can have a plan and be thinking about how you would continue your operations, continue getting paid, continue serving the kids in your care.
And how just out of curiosity, how can these conversations begin? Because I think that's a question that many people might have.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, and we've got a few great videos. There's one from Banana Cabana, which was the 60, it served 60 kids down there in the Florida Keys, and we talked about this a little bit. And, it was simply a matter of going to the local school and asking. This wasn't something that someone is going to come to, the child care providers and say, hey, can we help you? You've got to be a little proactive on some of this and start thinking about it. Luckily, the conversation has been moving, and emergency managers and cities are beginning to think about these issues because fire departments and police departments and hospital emergency rooms and 911 dispatchers, all those folks need child care too. So it's really become an essential part of their toolkit to make sure the first responders and the secondary responders have places to go so that you can get the child care back up and running. But again, the time to have that conversation is now. Think about that plan and figure out who you could partner with versus after the hurricane. All right. So we want to just recap a little bit of today. We're certainly very happy for everybody who's been joining us and asking some great questions. If you do have any questions, we'd love to hear them, and we'll do our best to answer those questions if we can. But we do have a lot of great resources on childcareprepare.org and over at the Sesame Street and Communities website as well. So we would encourage you to check those out. They're all free.
They're all free.
They're
in English and in Spanish.
That's true, yes. Very good, in English and Spanish. We do have a bunch of upcoming webinars that are coming up, and those are free too. And the child care providers who attend the live portion of our webinars actually get continuing education credits. So that's a big bonus. And we thank our partners over at the National Association for Family Child Care, who's a big sponsor on those webinar series with us. So please sign up for those if you need some CEUs and get some knowledge. We do them at 8 o'clock at night Eastern Time. That way we can get folks off work, hopefully. And we also have them recorded, so you can go back and watch them on demand if you can't make the live versions. What else do we have to plug? We've got some other stuff on Sesame Street that is definitely worthwhile. You've got information on how to make a family plan.
Exactly. So we have the Sesame Street and Communities.org website. In the handling emergencies, you're going to have how to make a plan, how to some ideas for the kit, and also actually something that we sometimes forget when it comes to young kids. And as families, we forget to tell them what our full names are, and so they just know mommy and daddy, and that becomes a huge problem when you're trying to reunite children. So it's a really catchy song, just warning you about the catchiness to help children learn their first and last names, and also the first and last names of the parents in their care.
Are you going to sing it?
I'm sorry, what? No, no.
Oh, I thought you were I thought you were going to sing it.
Grover does a really good job.
Well, we're no Grover, that's
yes,
for sure.
Exactly. So we have those materials. We have the during or actually right after the hurricane, where you have all the information on not only the episode, but some materials that you can actually share with your families. You as a provider read them ahead of time. Make sure that you know all that material so that you can also share with them, not only with the text or the printouts, but also talk through them with the families that you serve. And let's not forget that this is a very traumatic experience for yourself. So please, everything that you're doing for families, do it for yourself too, for your own families. A lot of the providers that we've talked to, sometimes in the heat of the moment, they forget that they need to practice those same self-care strategies. So just start now, and that way when something hits, you will be prepared. And then finally, recovering from a disaster does take a lot of time, and we know that it's a community effort, and sometimes it's so unexpected, right? Some of these effects of a hurricane have been quite unexpected, actually, recently. In particular, so prepare yourself also with just strategies on how to cope with some of the very difficult circumstances, like the traumatic circumstances. And for that, we have an entire section on trauma that breaks it down into really very simple strategies that you can be practicing now, whether you have trauma or not. You also should look into some of our materials around resilience, because again, talking about feelings and looking for strategies around keeping yourself strong emotionally could help you during an emergency too. So the work that you're doing with the kids right now in your programs, when you're teaching them feeling words, when you're really helping them to develop their social emotional skills, that is part of the preparedness that you're providing to the entire community, to the families and to the kids. So look into some of the materials, but also know that what you're doing now and what you're encouraging in your programs is so important to make sure that the well-being of those children, particularly the emotional well-being of the kids after circumstances like this, continues to develop in a normal way.
It's always amazing to me that, when you think about children and by the time they get to, kindergarten, gosh, they already know what to do in a lot of different emergencies. Mm-hmm. And that's really thanks to our child care providers out there. I mean, if you think about it, child care providers are really the first educators of, fire drills and earthquake drills or tornado mm-hmm. drills, severe weather. So, thank you for all you're doing to help prepare our kids, because these are really lessons that they learn at very young ages while under your care, but they know them for the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. So just a tremendous shout out to all the great work that happens there. And I think a lot of times that doesn't really go noticed. It's just mm-hmm. kids show up at kindergarten and they know what to do for fire drills.
And it's also because they do such a good job. The kids are not scared of right. practicing some of these skills. So, but they're so important. So thank you. Yes.
So we have a question here about the local elementary schools been put on a list that would have severe damage and high wind. That was my go-to place if the facility was damaged. Any other ideas for public places to go? Well, I would say that the challenge with the public places to go is that, oftentimes when we talk to child care providers and when we do our trainings, we'll have, 30 to 60 providers in a class, and, we'll ask them, hey, who's planning to go to the local elementary school? And everybody raises their hands. Or who's planning to go to the library? And everybody raises their hands. And the question becomes, well, does that school or library know that you're coming? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes they don't. There's no signed, memorandum of understanding or agreement or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we've been thinking about a lot is, how can providers help other providers? So it's a good idea if you've got providers, in your neighborhood that you could go to. So if you just have a localized incident at your house, a fire or something that forces you out of your program, maybe you could go to somebody down the street, not too far away. Mm-hmm. But also see if you can make friends with somebody that's a few miles away. So if you do have to evacuate, you can get in. Maybe you can work with your licensing department and that child care provider to temporarily expand the capacity so that your kids can come over as well. The local emergency managers in their duties usually have a good sense of what public buildings are going to be used for shelters, and what that capacity looks like. Again, it's a great idea to check in with those folks and share with them, your thoughts or your concerns, saying, hey, we're really thinking if there's a disaster, we're going to go here or we're going to go there. A lot of times they probably haven't thought about you, quite honestly, and if you go there and have that phone call or that conversation, they can really provide a wealth of knowledge, and it will get them starting to think about kids. If you've ever went to a shelter, that's not a place for kids to be. It's not kid friendly, but through your help and your conversations, maybe you can put together a kit that the county can use in their shelter to have some toys, and even just a rug you can put on the gym floor, makes it a lot easier.
And we were talking a little bit about that, helping children feel comfortable in these very difficult places. Use the materials, make a copy. They can use one as a poster in the section where kids can go and just have a little nudge of comfort, right? So it's something to keep in mind. The materials are there to be used in many, many different ways, and that can be one of them.
Yeah, and for our child care resource and referral agencies that are out there, I know a lot of you have lending libraries. We've been talking to a lot of county emergency management officials and child care resource and referral agencies. Think about a lending library that you could put together that you could use every day, but you could also designate, to be used in a disaster, to dispatch or send to that shelter, and all of a sudden now, boom, this whole resource comes to the shelter with, toys and games and all that kind of stuff.
I actually remember when one of the hurricanes hit here, and my little girl has 2, and she kept bringing this book and kept bringing this book, and I was like, oh yeah, well, let's read it, and then I realized why she wanted me to read the book is because it was all about rain. And so it was her way of telling me I need to talk about what happened. And
that's very
so yes, include things that are related and also things that are not. Another one was about hugs. She just wanted a lot of hugs. But that's a great idea, because children do need those type of experiences. If everything else goes, one routine, like reading a book at night, could be so important, so helpful for them, as we all know, because you create those routines every day.
Well, and really have those conversations with children. We know every day 70 million kids are separated from their parents, either at school or in child care. And if you think about Hurricane Katrina, and I know our friends from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children always, tout this because it's so important. We had 5,000 kids that got separated from their parents in Hurricane Katrina. Again, that's a notice event. Hurricane Katrina didn't just happen one day. We knew that thing was coming for days. And we still managed to have 5,000 kids get separated from their parents. So, making sure you work with your kids so that they do know their first and last names and where they live and all that kind of stuff is really important because, we never want to see something like that happen again. That was horrible. And it took almost 7 months to reunite the last child with their family. I mean, that's horrible. Well, I want to thank everybody who's attended here and watched our little Facebook Live event. Definitely thank our friends here at Sesame Street. It's always great to see all the good work that they do and be surrounded by a bunch of friends.
Thank you so much for having us here.
We might have some cookies later. Is that okay? If folks want to find out more, let's get a couple plugs in. Where can they go to find out about the great work of Sesame Street?
Yes, go to sesamestreetincommunities.org. All the topics that we've talked about today are right there, and I'm giving you only one direction to go to because it's the easiest way for you to look at the materials. If you want to email me, you can too. We can make my email available to you so that we can, if you want any hard copies or you have any questions on the materials, I'm happy to help.
And I will give a shout out to our wonderful social media guru, Liz, who's been manning the cameras and managing the chat box for us and all that kind of stuff. So thank you, Liz. A fantastic job. Anything that we can do to help at Child Care Aware of America, again, our website is childcareprepare.org, and that'll link you up with a whole bunch of different resources. Sign up for our listservs, sign up for our webinars. If you want to know more about our active shooter training, there's information on that there. And the mobile texting pilot that we're doing with Compliant Campaign is listed on that website as well. So childcareprepare.org is kind of your one-stop shop. There's a big button there that says request technical assistance or training. If you do need to drop us a line, you can fill out that form, and that'll come right to our inbox too. So I guess with that, from Sesame Street, we really want to say thank you for everybody to joining us today. This has been a real treat. We hope that you found it useful, and we will see you in the near future.
Thank you.